Arthur No Fee Fitness here. Answer yourself one question. Choose strength or hypertrophy. But what if I tell you you can choose both? Muscle development starts with understanding what kinds of muscle the body contains and how each grows. Human tissue is broadly organized into smooth, cardiac, and skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle forms the contractile walls of hollow organs and vessels, from the entire gastrointestinal tract to bronchial passages and most blood vessel walls. It operates reflexively, governed by the autonomic nervous system, and its cells can enlarge, hypertrophy, and when stimulation persists, such as during pregnancy, also multiply, hyperplasia. Cardiac muscle is found only in the heart. Like smooth muscle, it is involuntary, but its architecture is distinctive: branched, striated fibers linked by intercalated discs that synchronize contraction. Cardiac fibers cannot divide. Adaptation to chronic workload therefore relies almost exclusively on hypertrophy of existing cells. Finally, skeletal muscle attaches to the skeleton and to a lesser extent to facial skin. It is under voluntary control, contains the familiar dark and light striations, and crucially for training, does not reproduce new fibers in meaningful numbers after maturity. Growth in skeletal muscle therefore depends on enlarging the fibers you already possess. Skeletal fibers enlarge when repeated mechanical tension and metabolic stress trigger a sustained rise in muscle protein synthesis. Inside every fiber, contractile units called sarcomeres align end-to-end in long myofibrils. Hypertrophy is largely an increase in the number and cross-sectional area of these myofibrils. Satellite cells, small stem cell-like nuclei positioned between the fiber membrane and its outer lamina, fuse with overloaded fibers, donating extra genetic material that supports higher protein turnover. Unlike smooth muscle, however, the satellite cell pool is finite, so growth potential is ultimately driven by training quality, nutrition, recovery, and endocrine permissiveness, rather than by creation of entirely new fibers. Because smooth, cardiac, and skeletal muscle differ in cell architecture and neural control, their adaptive ceilings also differ. Smooth muscle can both enlarge and multiply. Cardiac muscle can only enlarge. Skeletal muscle enlarges, with only minimal fiber addition. For athletes, that means training variables must target hypertrophy directly, rather than rely on cell division. Knowing this cellular backdrop clarifies why specific loading schemes, nutrition protocols, and recovery practices are essential to long-term progress. Once the cellular landscape is clear, the next step is the physiology of skeletal hypertrophy. Mechanical tension, generated when a load forces cross bridges inside sarcomeres to cycle under strain, activates mechanosensitive pathways such as the mTOR complex 1 cascade. When mechanical tension coincides with adequate amino acid availability, mTOR upregulates synthesis of myofibrillar proteins, producing thicker and more numerous actin and myosin filaments. Metabolic stress from sustained sets adds a secondary stimulus, important, encouraging cellular swelling, increasing glycogen storage, and upregulating local growth factors like IGF-1. Nutritional practice supports these pathways. Important daily protein intake of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight has been repeatedly shown to maximize muscle protein synthesis in resistance-trained adults, with leucine-rich meals distributed every 3 to 5 hours to maintain the anabolic signal. Sufficient total energy is equally important. Warning: chronic energy deficit suppresses mTOR signaling and limits satellite cell activity. Micronutrients such as magnesium, zinc, and vitamin D modulate endocrine function, while omega-3 fatty acids appear to enhance muscle protein synthesis sensitivity in older trainees. Training structure determines how these molecular processes accumulate. A strength-focused routine typically employs loads of 85% or more of 1 repetition maximum, sets of 1 to 5 reps, and long rest intervals of 3 to 5 minutes to preserve neural drive. This maximizes recruitment of high-threshold motor units and promotes myofibrillar density, but overall weekly volume is moderate. A hypertrophy-focused block shifts to 65 to 80% of 1 rep max, sets of 6 to 15 reps, shorter rests of 60 to 90 seconds, and higher weekly set counts per muscle. The resulting combination of sustained tension, greater metabolic stress, and higher volume elevates total protein synthesis over time and encourages some sarcoplasmic expansion, an increased volume of non-contractile cytoplasm and supportive structures. Important: neither approach exists in isolation. Strength cycles raise the ceiling for later hypertrophy blocks by enhancing neural efficiency. Hypertrophy cycles expand cross-sectional area, providing more contractile material to express force during the next strength phase. Advanced programming therefore alternates or blends the two through periodization. Important, regardless of the phase, progressive overload, systematically increasing load, volume, or frequency is the central driver. Without it, warning, the mTOR response plateaus and further growth stagnates. Practical application starts with assessing experience level. Novices respond to almost any sensible program because untrained fibers are far from their genetic ceiling. A full body routine of 2 to 3 compound lifts per session performed 3 times a week builds both strength and size efficiently. Intermediate lifters benefit from targeted splits, upper, lower, or push-pull legs, allowing higher total weekly volume while maintaining recovery. Advanced athletes increasingly rely on microperiodization, manipulating intensity, volume, and exercise selection within a 7 to 10 day microcycle to sustain progressive overload without exceeding connective tissue tolerance. Recovery is inseparable from training stress. Muscle protein synthesis remains elevated for roughly 24 to 48 hours after a hard session in trained individuals. Adequate sleep, 7 to 9 hours, and post-exercise protein maximize this window. Chronic sleep restriction impairs growth hormone pulses and increases cortisol, undermining both hypertrophy and strength development. Active recovery days, low-intensity aerobic work or mobility sessions promote blood flow and facilitate substrate replenishment without adding significant mechanical strain. Cardiovascular adaptations deserve note. While skeletal fibers grow through hypertrophy, cardiac adaptations to regular endurance work involve both chamber enlargement and wall thickening, improving stroke volume. Resistance training alone can increase left ventricular wall thickness modestly. Combining aerobic conditioning maintains cardiovascular efficiency without compromising strength gains, provided total weekly training load remains recoverable. Clinical perspectives reinforce the importance of continuous training. Skeletal muscle atrophy accelerates after just 2 weeks of disuse, driven by reduced mechanical loading and decreased satellite cell signaling. In aging populations, sarcopenia emerges from the same pathways that once promoted growth, but now downregulate due to anabolic resistance. Regular progressive resistance exercise, adequate protein, and vitamin D sufficiency slow this decline, demonstrating that hypertrophy principles are relevant across the lifespan, not just to athletes. In summary, muscle size and strength diverge only when programming deliberately biases one adaptation over the other. Both start with the same cellular building blocks, existing skeletal fibers that enlarge through myofibrillar and to a degree sarcoplasmic expansion aided by satellite cell fusion. Mechanical tension, metabolic stress, sufficient nutrition, and planned recovery form the foundation. By adjusting load, repetition range, rest interval, and weekly volume, athletes can tilt the balance toward maximal force production, maximal cross-sectional area, or a strategic blend of both. Continuous adherence, objective tracking, and incremental progression turn those cellular mechanisms into visible, measurable performance. Maintain those fundamentals and skeletal muscle will respond predictably, growing stronger, larger, or optimally balanced depending on the demands you place upon it.